Right, so I am now recording my screen so I can save it as a video to upload for anybody that's not here today, or if you just need to go back and look at something. So today we're going to be drawing the figure 4-62 gasket, and if we zoom in, and you guys can find this in Google Classroom, it's under the single view drawings worksheet or handout that I posted, and it's the last one on that first sheet that I posted. So if you're looking for it on Google Classroom, just so you can see it up close as we're talking, you can have it on one screen, put it on one monitor, and have my screen on the other monitor. But let's look at this. Is it a complex object? Because so far we've drawn just regular lines, right? Straight lines. We have no circles. Do you guys remember how to sketch a circle? What do we have to do first? Say it a little bit louder. Okay, we have to make center lines. Excellent. That was what I was looking for. So the first thing that we need to know about a circle, because circles are actually, they're either cylinders on a real object or holes. So we need to know where the center is, right? And how many location dimensions do we have for circles? There were 2, correct? So 2 location dimensions and then 1 size dimension. So for every circle, whether it's an actual cylinder that has material or a hole that's cutting material away, we have 3 dimensions. We'll have 2 location dimensions and then we'll have a size dimension. So on our sketch, remember we're not using our instruments, we're pretty much using a pencil and paper to quickly get an idea down, and we're being more precise than probably what you would do if you were actually, you know, just out in the field getting a sketch down quickly. We are being a little more precise, but we're keeping proportions, and we want to sketch these circles by creating a construction rectangle or square around the area before we actually make our circle. And why do we do that? You guys remember? What does our circles look like, or what do my circles look like if I don't have some construction lines to help me? Probably looks like a little football or something like an egg shape rather than a circle shape. So the reason why we sketch this square around the size of our circle is to help us keep those proportions of their circle and make it actually look like a circle. And what size do we make that square? It's a dimension that we get from the circle. So we know that we have 2 location dimensions, but we also have a size dimension. So the size of our square that we're going to create as a construction line is also the diameter of our circles. So when we look at this object, we see that really it's symmetrical, right? It's symmetrical by the horizontal line and the vertical line. So we can start out with center marks. So when we're centering our paper, what would be the easiest strategy to use? When we take our scale and just kind of estimate the diagonals and create that X in the middle, and that becomes our center point, and then we can start out with our center marks. So that's what we're going to do on this one. Now don't get ahead of me because I'm going to do this one with you. But then we'll work our way out from the center and we'll create squares. And really this object is just several circles together. So we have 1, 2 for the inside diameter and the outside diameter, and then we have 8 holes around what we call a bolt hole circle. So this center line that goes through the center of all of these circles is actually called a bolt hole circle, and you'll see this a lot on drawings or parts that are bolted down and that has a series of bolts in what we call a polar array. So if we see this center line circle, that means we need to keep it on our object when we draw it, because that becomes part of our center line. So notice that our center line is circular, and then our other, like the vertical center line here for that center mark, actually goes with the angle of the circle. So all of these circles are going to be at 45 degrees, and so should our center marks be. Okay, so we've got a little bit different structure that we're going to use today, and that's why we're going back and doing this one together. So the first thing that we want to do is get our instruments out, and we all have a sheet of graph paper. To get our center marked, we're just going to use our scale because it's the longest instrument that we have. So we're going to come here. Let me zoom back out so you can see me. So the first step is to get the center of our paper so our drawing can be centered and look nice on our paper. Okay, so we're going to do just like we did before. Try to line it up the best you can with the corners, and just put a little mark for an X in the middle. And remember, this should be very light. Mine's a little darker so you can see it on the camera, but it should be very, very light because you're just going to erase it. And then again, we'll try to center this up. We could be very, very accurate and do some math, but as long as we are close to center, our drawing's going to look great. It's more important to be accurate on the drawing itself, on the part itself, than it is to be centered on the paper. So then, once we have our center marks, I'm just going to bump it up to my closest full square. So my closest full square is right here. So that's actually, I'm going to just put a little dot there to show that that's actually where I'm starting. And we really don't need the X anymore, so before we put a whole lot of marks on our paper, we are going to erase that X. Okay, and we're going to use our brush to get rid of our marks there from our eraser, extra eraser bits. And those eraser bits kind of come in handy later on, and we can actually use those to keep our paper a little bit cleaner. But for now, I'm just getting them out of the way. So we have our start point, and I'll take a second. Is everybody with me on our start point? Okay, good. All right, then the next thing that we want to do is make our center marks. Now remember, this is a sketch, so we don't have to use all of our instruments. We can just freehand these center marks. Since we're on a line of our grid paper, we can do some pretty good center marks just without worrying too much about crooked lines, because we can just follow the lines of our grid paper. I'm going to switch pencils because I got out of lead on that one. And I don't really know how long my center marks are going to be just yet. So if I do make them too long, I can always go back and erase. And I always want to keep, I have a short line and then a gap and then a long line. So I always want to keep that gap in there. That just indicates that it is a center line. And remember, the center lines will go just shortly outside of the object, so we know that it is indicated as a center line and not a visible line or object line. So here's what I got so far. I'm in the center of my paper, and I can kind of eyeball this. If you sit back and look at it and eyeball it, you can see that it's pretty good centered. On graph paper, if you're a box off to the right or the left or vertically up and down, it's not a big deal as long as your object is correct. So looking back at our drawing here, the first circle that we should do is probably that inside circle closest to the center. So that's going to be the inside diameter here. So what is the diameter for that circle that we need to make? Where do we find that? It's right here. It says 3 DIA. That means 3 diameter. And this is an older drawing. So today, instead of DIA, we'd have probably what would look like the symbol first and then the dimension. So it would look like this today if you put it on a drawing. So the diameter symbol and the dimension, but the leader is the same. It'll still have that tail coming off and still go to the circle as this. But sometimes you'll see older drawings and you'll see abbreviations instead of symbols, but that's what that means. So we have a 3-inch diameter. So each of these boxes we said was a 1/4 inch, and there are 12 boxes in 3 inches, but we need to take half of that because we have a diameter, right? And half of the diameter is the radius, and that's where we're counting from, is half, because we're counting from the center out. So instead of going the 12 boxes, we're just going 1.5 inches, which is how many boxes? 6 boxes. So even without using your scale, we can make a pretty accurate drawing with graph paper. So we're going to go 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6 out on all sides. And remember, we're just putting a little mark to hold our place on all sides. And we're going to make our box, and we want to make this box so light that we can just barely see it. Okay, so I have my marks. You can see those here. And just as a time saver for me, you might put a little dot there, but I usually just put a little line in the direction in which I need to go. So these were vertical, these were horizontal, and that's because I'm just going to box in this square. That's the size of my circle. So the square is the diameter of the circle. And remember, we're going to erase this, so very, very light. Mine is actually a little too dark, but again, I wanted you to be able to see it on the screen. So these are very, very light construction lines. We looked at graphite or lead sizes yesterday. What kind of lead, if we're using a mechanical pencil, what would be an ideal size to make a construction line? Do you guys remember? Probably a 0.3 if you had it, and 0.5 if you had it, and if you didn't have the 0.3 and you had a 0.5, that would be the best. So the smallest lead size is going to make the best construction lines. And if we were using a regular pencil and we had an H type pencil, anything less than the 2H, because remember 2H was kind of the midway between the hard and the soft leads. So anything less than that 2H would make pretty decent construction lines because it would be very hard and would make a very light line. So once we get our box, now what we can do is create our circle. Now we don't want to just try to create the circle all at one time because then that would defeat the purpose of having a nice box for us. But you're going to do like 1/4 of it at a time. So depending on how you want to do it, you can start on this side, you can start on the other side, but you want to just take your pencil and kind of make a large arc to where you're keeping it in line with those quadrant points. And if you do that on all the quadrants, it still probably won't be a perfect circle, But if you're like me, it's going to be better than what you can normally do. And you can see here, you know, I could do much better than that probably. So I'm going to erase it and try it again. Now once we start actual board drawing and we get out of the sketching phase, we can use a compass for this or a template and create these. So now we have a nice circle, and that circle is a visible line or what we call object line, so it should be a little darker. What I don't want you to do is color in the lines, because a lot of times people say, okay, it needs to be darker, and then they'll start coloring in the lines and doing something like this. We don't want to color in lines. We want that line to be just nice and smooth, because remember, this is not artistic work, this is engineering work, and everybody's needs to look the same. So we don't need colored in lines, we just need it to be one strong smooth line. Okay? And I know there's some things that I need to clean up there, but we'll clean up the drawing at the end and make sure all of our lines are what they're supposed to be. So that's our first circle. And I'll give you guys a second to get caught up if you need it. So the circle that we just made is this inside diameter circle, and that's that 3-inch diameter circle, which is the smallest one right here in the center. The next thing that we're going to make is this bolt hole circle. We're going to wait and make the small ones at the end, but we'll go ahead and make the bolt hole circle, and then we'll also make the outer diameter circle. So if we look at this bolt hole circle, the one that looks like the center line, that diameter is 4 3/8. So that's not going to be a multiple or a factor of the 1/4 inch that we have on our graph paper. So we know up front that we're going to be off the graph line. So it's going to land in the middle of a box instead of right on a box. So we're going to have to make lines, good lines, without the benefit of that grid line. But we can do it. We've got some practice behind us now, so we can do it. So we've got 4 3/8. What is half of 4? 2, right? And we need to take half because we actually need the radius. So half of 4 is 2, and then what's half of 3/8? 3/16. We did our magic math, right? And just times the bottom number by 2. So this is a sketch, and we don't have instruments to measure with. We actually do have instruments, but I don't want you to use them just yet. Once you get practice sketching. So 2 3/16. We are actually going to have to round that to about 2 1/8 because it's going to be, we can guess on the 3/16, but 1/8 is going to be half of this box. So we'll just do a little more than half the box. So it'll be a guess, but we can get pretty close. So from the center mark that we already have, our main center mark, we're going to go out on all sides 2 inches and 3/16. So how many boxes would that be? 2 would be 8 boxes, right? And then 3/16 is going to be a little more than half a box. So we're going to go a little more than 8 1/2 boxes. So what that looks like on our drawing, you do 1, 2, we know this is 6, so we'll go out 2 more, and just a little bit over the half point. So something like that. So sketching, not extremely accurate, but we're pretty close. We're keeping good proportions, which is what we need to do. So go ahead and do that all the way around. and we'll make another circle. And that circle that we're making this time is going to be a center circle. And once you get your lines, go ahead and sketch in that box. And remember, keep your eye on where you're going to try to keep your lines a little straighter. And you can see I kind of missed my mark some on that one, but that's okay. We're erasing our box. If we do this, we can kind of keep our circle in line with our mark instead of our box. Get as close as you can and as accurate as you can on these sketches. And once you have your box created, you can feel free to go ahead and create your circle. Now this circle, we're obviously going to keep it, but it's not a visible line. It's going to become a center line. And center lines aren't quite as dark as the object line, but on a sketch, you're probably not going to be able to tell a huge difference. And when the circles are finished, they should be concentric. They are concentric because they're sharing the same center, and that's what concentric means. And being concentric implies that they should also be parallel. So just make sure your circles, you kind of try to look like they're the same proportion and parallel as well. So again, these aren't perfect. They're not going to be perfect drawings, but we're getting pretty close, and that's what a sketch is about. And some of these marks we can go back at the end and clean up. So I'll give you a few minutes to get that second circle finished. So the third circle that we're going to create for this drawing is that outer diameter. And the outer diameter is this very large number here, the 5 3/4 inch diameter. And so again, we need the radius. So if we divide 5 by 2, we get 2.5 or 2.5. Okay? And then if we divide 3/4 by 2, we get 3/8. So when we're dealing with fractions, we know that we have to have the same denominator. So how many eighths is 1/2? It would be 4/8, right? So 4/8 plus 3/8, we know now that we just have to add on the top, so we have 7/8. So half of 5 3/4 is 2 7/8. So 7/8, if we were to look at 7/8 on our 16 scale, 7/8 is going to be here. So it's almost a full inch, just a little bit less. So now again we're going to land on half of a box. So if we have 8 boxes for 2 inches, and then 3.5 more boxes for the 7/8. So we're going to have 11.5 boxes, and that's going to be equal to the radius. Okay, so from all sides of our center point, we're going out 11.5 boxes from the center point to get that box, to get that construction box for our large circle. So from the center, go out 11.5 boxes on all sides. Right, so you can see my marks. Yours should look similar to mine. And then you can go ahead and make your square. Again, this is a construction line, so we want to try to make it very light. So you're going to have something that looks kind of like this when you're finished. And as you go, the more you sketch, the better you're going to get at it. So you may not have to make the entire box later. You might just be able to make the little marks to keep your diameter correct, because you'll know in proportion, how far up you need to make this arc to make a good circle. So you may get away with, possibly in the future just making this little mark, like the quadrant marks, and maybe just the corner mark to kind of keep you on track. But for now, since we're beginners, we just make the complete box and we'll know that we're at least proportional and mostly accurate, since this is a sketch. So once you get that box completed, you go ahead and try to make your circle. And if you need to rotate your paper, since this is a sketch, we didn't tape our paper down. So if you are better at making that arc at a certain angle than you are other angles, you feel free to rotate that paper. bigger the circle, the longer it may take you to get where you need to be. But then you should have something similar to what I have on my screen. So just as a quick check, is everybody okay? Anybody have any questions? All right, good. So I'll give you a second to get caught up on that circle. So we'll take a break shortly after. Let's go ahead and finish what we're doing here, and we'll take a break in a few minutes. So basically what's left of this object is our small circles. We've got 8 holes that are 5/8 diameter, and we also have to make these center marks. So our center marks are at an angle, 45-degree angle, and we already have our quadrant center marks, our vertical and horizontal. So we have to estimate this 45-degree angle. And remember, this is a sketch, so we're estimating everything. But we can do a very good estimate by just eyeballing the 90-degree angle and making a line right in the middle. So that's what we're going to do. And then that 45-degree line becomes the center mark for our small circles. And where it intersects our bolt hole circle, that intersection becomes the center mark, or the center of that hole. So our next step would be to find the centers of those holes. So we're going to estimate our 45-degree line. And we can do a really good job estimating a 45 line or 45-degree line by just connecting to the corners of our grid paper. So since we have grid paper and we started at a corner, a 45-degree line should just be connecting those diagonals all the way through. And we can take this, because it is a center line, we can take it all the way through a little bit outside of that last circle, so this very large outer diameter. So we're going to do that. We're going to have 4 of these 45-degree lines. Because there's 8 holes every 45 degrees.
I don't know what shape these circles are supposed to be.
It's okay. That's why we're doing this, because we are working on getting better.
They look like huge square.
That's okay. What we do want to have as well, since we have gaps with our vertical and horizontal center lines, we also want to have a gap with these 45 lines. So I'm just going to erase a little bit of that so you can kind of see that there is supposed to be a gap there as well. And that just indicates that it's a center line. And I could probably do a little better job in connecting those. So it's going to look something like this. Now when I zoom out, you can see that my center lines go a little bit outside that outside diameter circle. And right now it looks very complex. We have a lot of lines in there, but remember we're going to erase our squares. So some of that will disappear. A good idea or a good practice may be to go ahead and erase the square after we do the circle. But this is our first drawing, so we're going through the motions of the entire thing, and then you can go back and clean it up. But once you get better and more efficient, you may want to go ahead and erase that square after you make the circle, and then it's not interfering with some of these other lines, because some of these lines we'll probably have to trace back in since they're overlapping. But now that we've made these center lines, we want to make sure that the vertical and the horizontal center lines actually, go where they're supposed to. This one on mine is a little bit long, so I'm going to erase that. You want to go about 1/8 or 1/4 of an inch past the last entity of your actual object. So past the last object line, it's usually about 1/8 of an inch. Is what it calls for in the standards. But if your circle is very large, it doesn't look terrible if you do go about 1/4 of an inch. So not too much past it, but past it enough to where whoever is creating this object for production can tell that it's a center line. All right, and then once we get our 45-degree lines, we have the centers of all those circles. So just showing you where the center, this would be a center, this would be a center, and all the way around. So because we need gaps in our center mark, we're going to actually do gaps here as well. So I'm just going to darken this in just a little bit so you can see better on the screen, but we're actually going to have gaps around this center mark for this circle. So if I'm doing this one first, and I can actually just make that a little bit better so it's not so colored in. So part of that circle is also going to have the dash, and then the center line is going to have the dash. So it's going to look something like this, and like I said, it's a sketch, so we're as proportional as we can be. It looks like my circle might be a little off there. At the end, we can go in and clean it up a little better, make our lines all uniform in thickness. Since we have a center mark, let's talk about these circles. This circle is a 5/8 of an inch diameter. Okay, so I'm looking at my center mark here. On my drawing, this center mark would actually be this circle. So 5/8 inch diameter, what would the radius be there? So remember, we're timesing the bottom number by 2, so it's going to be a 5/16. So if we look on our engineer scale here, 5/16, remember each of these marks, I'm sorry, the architect scale, these little marks are 1/16 of an inch. Remember, every mark is 1/16. So even if we didn't understand 1/8, 1/4, and so on, we could count each of these little marks and get to 5/16 that we need to do. So 1, 2, 3, 4, 5. And the reason why I'm showing you this is just to give you a perspective. Our boxes are 1/8 or 1/4 of an inch, so this would be equal to 1 box. So we're a little bit over 1 box as far as the radius of that hole. So our construction box that we're going to make is going to be a little bit more difficult because we're already not exactly on the corner here, but we just need a little bit over one box. So you're just going to have to be diligent and kind of being equal on all sides here. So if I'm right here, one box and a little bit over a box is actually going to be here for me. And then one box and a little bit over that box is probably going to be around here. And the same thing on this side. And yours will be different because your graph paper is probably not exactly the same as mine. So just be diligent in getting your proportions correct here as far as how many boxes you go. And if we create a box for that small circle, take a second and look at it. You know, just sit back and look at it and say, okay, does that box look proportional? If it's too long on one side and not long enough on the other, then you may be a little bit off on your measurements. But once you get it, you can go ahead and make that circle. So we have that 5/8 diameter circle. So given that, you can go ahead and go all the way around at each of those points and do the same exact thing that we just did. So the radius, that's what we were talking about there. So when you go, it's going to be just a little bit over one box because it was 5/16. So you were lucky enough right here that you landed on a corner. So on this side, it's going to be just a little bit over that box. On this side, it'll be a little bit over, and so forth. Now, if you, let's say over here, you're still pretty lucky because you're on a corner, but if you weren't on a corner, you would just have to be proportional to where you were, you know, to go to the next box. Make sense? Okay, good deal. So this may take you a little bit of time, but make sure that you're making the circle, but you're also making the center mark in the middle. And this little center mark should be proportional really to the size of our circle. So if it's too large, you might have to do some erasing. But this drawing in itself is going to take some cleaning up after the fact. So just get your object lines in, and then we can spend some time just cleaning up our drawing. So remember, as we go, proportional is key when you're sketching. So once you have all the circles made, go ahead and start cleaning up your drawing. And by cleaning up, I mean, erasing all of your construction lines first. Once you have all of your construction lines erased, you can go back in and make sure all of your object lines are uniform, and that means they're all the same thickness. And make sure your center lines have the gaps in them, and just go a little bit outside the part. So this object, or this part in particular, is going to have a lot of cleanup to do because we have a lot of construction lines. So this might take you some time. So just use your big eraser and get it as cleaned up as you can. And if you have to draw some of the lines back, it's not a huge hardship because we are freehanding since it's a sketch. When we get into regular board drawing with the instruments, it's a little bit more of a hassle because you have to use instruments for every line. But in sketching, not quite as bad. So again, another good practice, once you get more confident in your sketching, is to go ahead and erase some of these boxes as you go so they don't overlap your other object lines. Let's go ahead and get our drawings cleaned up, and after we get the drawing cleaned up and we're at a good stopping point, we'll stop for a break. If you're like me and you have to erase several pieces of your object lines, you just need to make sure that you're making those back properly, all the same thickness. So we can definitely be a little more efficient, but like I said, this is our first drawing in creating circles. So we just want to make sure that we're doing it accurately, and then we tie in efficiency. So you can see on mine, I've got most of my little construction lines erased, and even some of my object lines I'm erasing if I feel like I can do a little bit better job. But I still have the outline of what was there, so basically you're just tracing back over that and making a nice clean line, all in uniform shape.
where should we do it, like, the home in case we are at home?
We will not take our boxes home, so I will send you home with some graph paper just in case, but only under very, very special circumstance would we ever take our box home.
I guess it would be when some, like, finish the board drawing or something.
Probably would not even be if you need to finish something. It would have to be something very special circumstance to do that. So you guys can see how I'm just trying to go around and make sure all my lines are the same thickness. Even if I have to retrace some, make sure you have gaps where your center mark should be. And if the center mark is part of the circle, make sure it does look like it's still part of the circle. So this one is kind of a tedious drawing. It's not super hard because it is just circles, but it does take a long time whenever you're estimating the diameter like we did. So here's pretty close. I could do a little more. Like right here, it's a little bit darker in that spot than it is the others. But we're pretty close to where we're getting uniform in all of the areas. So now there are some places where You know, you can barely see that we had construction lines, like you could still see a little bit of my box there. Even though on my paper, it looks like it's completely erased. Sometimes on the camera, it'll still pick up some of that shadow. But get as close as you can, and yours may even look much better than mine, which is great. I tried to quickly get mine done so you could see. To take your time, do a good job. And honestly, the center line should not be quite as dark as your object line. On the camera, mine looks very similar as far as thickness, but it should be a little bit lighter than your object line. But we'll practice that as well. So I'll give you a few more minutes to work on this, get this cleaned up, and we'll take a break in about 5 minutes, and then we'll come back and I will show you how to create a border to put on all of your sketches. So we'll put a border on this sketch first, and then we'll go back, and the 2 sketches that you've done previously, we'll also put a border on it, and that's going to carry us through today and tomorrow. So by tomorrow, you'll have all 3 of these sketches fully completed with a border and a title block. Okay?